I'm John Green. This is new weapons had unleashed an incredible amount of violence everywhere else on the planet. They'd colonized most of Africa, Asia, and the Pacific. Americans had also expanded across the continental United States and were making eyes at the Caribbean and Asia. And I want to be clear that this conquest and colonization was consistently violent, but some people were beginning to question the very idea of violence itself. Like in his 1894 book, The Kingdom of God is Within You, Leo Tolstoy, who knew a little bit about war and peace, explored how Jesus' message to, quote, turn the other cheek, was the basis for a life of nonviolence. He argued that governments and individuals needed to give up violence if they believed themselves to be true Christians. And Tolstoy also saw nonviolence as a solution to ending colonialism. In 1908, Tolstoy wrote a letter to a Hindu, to Mohandas Gandhi, and in the letter, he explained that Indians needed to confront British imperialism with love and nonviolence. Gandhi not only read that letter, he also published it in his South African newspaper, Indian Opinion, in 1909. And Tolstoy's ideas and his correspondence with Gandhi marked the beginning of an informal dialogue between advocates of nonviolence from around the world that spanned the 20th century. And Tolstoy wasn't the only influence on Mohandas K. Gandhi. He'd grown up in the Gujarat region of India, where there's a sizable Jain community. And through the Jain monks, Gandhi was exposed to the idea of ahimsa, non-violence or non-injury to life. He also read widely, including Western writers like John Ruskin and Henry David Thoreau. So after his return to India from South Africa in 1915, Gandhi began to distill his thinking related to nonviolence into a more explicit philosophy. In his 1929 autobiography, The Story of My Experiments with Truth, Gandhi wrote about how his belief in ahimsa could be the basis for Indians' resistance to British rule. So for Gandhi, nonviolence was both a way of life and a tool for gaining Indian self-rule. He saw Western civilization as violent and exploitative. That's ridiculous. I know the Eurocentrists are going to get mad at me for saying that, but it is true. It's a smidge violent and exploitative at times. That said, well done with like market-based innovation and the Mona Lisa, etc. Okay, let's move on. Gandhi believed that Indians could reject that lifestyle and replace it with a nonviolent one. And Gandhi also believed that Indians could bring about an end to British rule through a combination of ahimsa and satyagraha, a word often translated as adherence to truth. All right, let's go to the thought bubble. These interconnected ideas.
Okay. Hello, everyone. And so before I forget, let's do our attendance. Hooray, attendance. And so I have to first make sure I opened up the attendance site and American Foreign Policy and go to attendance and go to week 15 and smart attendance. And then let me make sure I open up the share screen so you can see it and go like that. And then you can see, and the number is 914. Yes, that's your lucky number, 914 for attendance for our Monday class. And so I will let that run on its own as I continue on with reminding you all that if you are not in the European Union policymaking class, that I'm also going to begin meeting with the students regarding the midterm, not the midterm, the final exam first drafts with the comments that I sent back to you. And I have to say, as I said with the European Union policymaking class, that I was a little more impressed with the quality of the final exams this semester. And I think this might have something to do with the some of the benefits of using all this technology, including Cyber Campus as well as Zoom, and recording the sessions, the class meetings, and posting the links so you can watch them. Because they seem a little more elaborate this time in terms of the quality of the work. So, and so you can see we'll meet this week, and then we also meet on a Friday, in part because we have our last debates then. And so let me go to the lesson plan and look at the lesson plan to remind us what are who are the debaters. And the lesson plan has two students, Clara versus Melis, on pro and con. To South Koreans, the global political effects of anthropogenic climate change will increase globalization. So we had the same kind of a question last week regarding the pandemic. And so what about climate change? And so if some of you have not signed up for a debate, this is your last chance. I think everybody has, so I'm not really worried about it, but you need to let us know to join either pro or con. And that will be our last debate. We also have a paragraph that's due by Wednesday and to prepare for the debate. And you'll submit that through the Cyber Campus. And let's go back to Cyber Campus to show you also that I have uploaded there maybe I can do it like this. Maybe I can go to Cyber Campus, maybe not. Yeah, it still says I'm sharing with you. So under assignment, you can see here that the final draft of your final exam is due a week from tomorrow, December 15. And then I will try to get all the grades done by the end of the week. So so that's the plan for the next 8 days, I should say. And then, so let's go on and talk about, let me close some extra things here I don't need open, and go back to the class notes. And what's this? Open this. Okay, got that open. And this is from the previous class. Let me close that. And what's this? Oh, okay. So let's do this since it's already open here. This was today in yesterday's New York Times, because we're ahead of the US, New York, by 14 hours here in South Korea. And so there's lots of discussion about what is Joe Biden going to do? What is Joe Biden going to do? And you know, you read in the Hook textbook, the beginning of the Hook textbook covers the different theoretical paradigm perspectives on trying to understand international relations in general and American foreign policy within the broader field of international relations. And there are three different, I don't want to say theories, but three different, it's almost like perspectives or worldviews about the nature of the world community, about international relations, about the world politics. And we talk about them. Why do we talk about them? We talk about them because we want to have something to begin with in terms of understanding what are the differences and among people in terms of how are they understanding the way the world is working. And the three different perspectives that we covered early in the semester can be labeled realism, liberalism, and constructivism. And realism might sound more appealing because who doesn't want to be a realist? Don't you want to be a realist? What's the opposite of a realist? A dreamer, a fantasist, somebody who lives outside of reality. A realist deals with reality, supposedly. Liberals are the term that we have for the people that we used to call idealists. Idealists were in contrast to realists. But Hans Morgenthau, whom you might recall when we talked about Hans at the beginning of the semester and at various points, is one of the founders of the modern field of international relations. He mocked the idealists, and he criticized people like Woodrow Wilson as being an idealist, that Woodrow Wilson had an idealistic view that if the world was structured around democracy and free trade, then the world would be peaceful. That the sources of conflict and violence in the world have to do with the fact that we have bad governments trying to maintain their rule inside their own country, often by appealing to warlike jingoism, mobilizing their people to support their authoritarian, corrupt rule, whether it be the Kaiser in Germany, or the Emperor in Austria-Hungary, or the Sultan in Turkey, trying to justify their archaic, outdated, feudal, old-fashioned rulership, command of their countries, partly by engaging in military adventures, claiming that only we, the warrior class, should be in charge of the country's foreign policy because we're experts at war. And that Woodrow Wilson argued that if you get rid of those criminals, those despots, those outdated rulers who are afraid of modernity, who are afraid about modern business and economy, about free trade, who are afraid of democracy, and allow people to participate both in economics and in politics, that the inherently good nature of people will manifest itself. And in other words, people are inherently predisposed towards cooperation, if only for business, right? If you want to engage in business, you have to cooperate with people. And 80% of human social interaction is about business. It's about making a better life for yourself. It's about making not just a better life for yourself, but for your children, your family. You want a better life for them, and that means you want, probably one of the things you want is more money, and you want to do business. But if you're going to do business with people, you have to have a relationship with them. You have to have customers and clients. You have to have suppliers. You have to have banks that will give you a loan because they trust you, because you've paid back your loans in the past, right? So you have to have relationships, and that means you have to cooperate. You don't always have to agree with each other, but you have to cooperate and resolve your conflicts peacefully to maintain a relationship so you can have win-win outcomes in the future, now and in the future, rather than zero-sum conflicts. And so Woodrow Wilson was, Hans Morgenthau loved to mock this person, that he was the foolish idealist who believed that if the United States entered the war, made the world safe for democracy by making this the war to end all wars. And how would it end all wars? Get rid of the Kaiser, get rid of the emperors, get rid of the sultans, break up these empires, make countries that represent the people, that have national self-determination, independent Poland, Polish state for Poland, and independent countries out of the wreckage of the Russian and German and Austrian and Turkish empires, and create countries that represent the wills of those peoples through having democratic constitutions, and opening up the world to trade, and creating a league of nations. Yes, a league of nations where the leaders of these countries will all come together and resolve their disputes in negotiation, in public, transparent negotiation, diplomacy, and that will make the world peaceful and prosperous. And Hans Morgenthau went, oh, you silly man, Woodrow Wilson. You silly man, you idealist. And so after Hans Morgenthau attacked Wilson, and we know what happened, by the way, after the 14 points, this is what Woodrow Wilson expressed as the reason why the Americans are entering the war in 1917, 1918. This was the justification. What did America want? Self-determination. Here are the 14 points, right? This is what the Americans are fighting for. They claim that they're fighting for in World War I. And it just summarizes everything I just said. And of course, soon almost all of those new democratic governments in these new states representing the Polish people, the Hungarian people, the German people, the Italian, soon they would be, eventually over the years, they would eventually collapse. All of those democracies would collapse, except with Czechoslovakia. It remained a democratic government until the Germans dismembered the country in 1939. But there would be a Bolshevik revolution in Russia, and these democracies collapsed into authoritarian military dictatorships or fascist dictatorships, like in Italy, and then we had the Great Depression and World War II. And so you didn't want to be an idealist, right? So they dropped the term idealist and became liberals. Right? And so liberalism is opposed to realism. Supposedly, they're different perspectives. And the different perspectives lie in fundamentally different assumptions regarding, I suggest, human nature, right? That they have fundamentally different assumptions regarding human nature. That, if I can open up the links here. And so, liberalism has its foundation also in the theories of John Locke, the English Anglo-Saxon theorist who described people's natures as basically good. If they're bad, they're made bad. People make people. People have bad natures, bad behavior, bad attitudes because they're raised in the wrong way, right? So John Locke talked about the tabula rasa, the empty slate. A person is born tabula rasa, as an empty slate, and through that person's socialization by their family and their environment, their nature is developed and shaped. In other words, human nature is not inherently bad, right? As the realist might assume. You know, John Locke is the father of liberalism, right? The father of liberalism. Whereas, if I can, maybe I can just kick back to, see if I can find Hobbes. And who was the other one that expressed the view, more dark view of human nature? Thomas Hobbes, right? That human beings basically are bad. Human nature is bad. And realists would claim Thomas Hobbes as one of the intellectual generators of the perspective of realism. And we described him, his book, The Leviathan, and in that famous cover about the Leviathan in Britain would end the chaos and violence of the English civil wars going on at this time by the people of Britain, and these are all elite aristocrats and the like, who come together, surrender their right to use violence, because of course, one of the main ways by which these people would die would be going into duels with each other, claiming that you have offended me. I challenge you to a duel. No more of that. Create a sovereign, a Leviathan, a great giant that would have the sole right to use deadly power and would legitimate its power through command of the church, because the King of England, in this case, this would be Charles II, he's advocating for Charles II to come back to Britain and take the throne, would legitimate his authority through religion, right? And that would bring peace. And that's how you overcome the security dilemma. So realists have expanded this notion out to the world political system, claiming we live in a world of anarchy, like England in the 16th century was a world of anarchy and violence and civil war, and we need to have a global Leviathan, and that Leviathan is the United States leading the Western alliance in some. And here you see South Korea, and there's Japan, and there's Belgium, and there's France, and there's Germany, and there's Bulgaria, and there's Romania, and there's now Vietnam, and there's I already mentioned South Korea, and they are together, they create the benign hegemon, the Leviathan, and it's acceptable and tolerable because American hegemony is nicer than what hegemony Germany under Hitler had planned for the world. Certainly, supposedly the hegemony that Soviet Union under Stalin was offering the world. Certainly better than the hegemony, at least in Asia, that the imperialist militarists in Tokyo were offering the world, and certainly better than anything else in the modern era. American hegemony is different because it's based upon, well, the neo-realists, the structural realists would point to liberalism. That liberalism and realism come together in neo-realism and neoliberalism. Neo-realism, also called structural realism, that the US would overcome the security dilemma by creating security for South Koreans and Japanese so they can cooperate with each other because they don't have to worry about being stabbed in the back, thanks to Barack Obama or Donald Trump or Joe Biden here. And the 30,000 American soldiers in South Korea and the 50,000 American soldiers in Japan, or between Germany and France. And they don't have to worry about being stabbed in the back and attacked by their neighbor because the Americans, the giant American Leviathan, will never permit it. And voila, you have the European integration movement. Because American hegemony does rely upon neoliberalism to promote trade and commerce. Now, is that really true? Constructivists, of course, point out or claim that basically, and as I think also as Hope pointed out in the beginning chapter, constructivists are like an elaboration upon these points. I think constructivists emphasize more the role of change in the world, particularly identity change. I mean, as I said, people's identities develop and change over the course of their lifetime and also over the course of their generations. I mean, 1,000 years ago, most people living what we call France today did not know what France was 1,000 years ago. Their identities were focused upon their family and their village. They didn't know what France was. So, and over the generations of economic and development and socio-economic, sociological trends emerging, people acquire these new identities, like to become citizens of France or citizens of Italy. and they want to participate in politics. But why would the change process stop? Because all three of these perspectives, realism, liberalism, constructivism, the advocates of those three different perspectives claim that we are talking about these issues because we want to solve the problem of war. We had 2 world wars in the 20th century. If we have another world war, it will be nuclear war, and that will be the end of our civilization. And hundreds of millions, if not billions, will die. So how can we bring about peace? Does it rely upon the benign hegemon, America, with its tremendous military technology and this nice side of it with its liberalism and capitalism and at least its favoritism towards or verbal expressions of support for democracy and human rights, together with its shock and awe weapons, its stealth fighters, and its amazing weaponry and technology? Together, is that the solution? What about European integration? What do we do with European integration, since some of you are coming from the European policymaking class? Constructivists really like to focus upon the European Union, right? So does that mean the identity change process stops in Europe and stops in the world? Once you become French citizens, you never can become something else? You never will, that identity is locked forever as people's primary and terminal, most large and intense identity community that they have, identification community that they have, and it will never change again. Well, why would it stop? Change always happens. Can we create a European identity that builds and grows and becomes even stronger than French or Belgian identity or Italian identity? How does that happen? These are the kinds of questions that constructivists are interested in. And some constructivists are radical left critiques of this benign hegemony notion of American structural realism. They criticize and note that Americans are nationalists too, just like the Chinese and the Russians and the Germans and the Japanese. And one of the aspects of political psychology that build upon the findings or the insights of Hans Morgenthau many, many years ago was that people tend to see a world in a way that allows them to feel good about doing whatever it is they want to do. So are the Americans really so supportive of democracy and freedom? Do they really support democracy and human rights and self-determination? What about what the Americans are doing with regard to supporting the rights of self-determination for the Palestinians? I mean, Donald Trump is open about it. That, yeah, that's all of that territory in Palestine belongs to the Jews. And you Palestinian Arabs, if you don't like it, you can become Jewish or you can leave and you can go move to Jordan or you can move to all the other 30 Arab countries that you Arab people have and let the Jews have their one sliver piece of land that they should have after the horror of the Holocaust. What about America's support for Saudi Arabia, that corrupt, conservative, authoritarian, incredibly corrupt country at a level of corruption we cannot even conceive? Jordan's incredibly corrupt, another close American ally. The oil sheikdoms of United Arab Emirates, and I mean, incredibly corrupt. And you see Americans pushing for democracy there. Is America pushing for democracy in Egypt? Not under Donald Trump. Barack Obama said, you know, yeah, Morris, yeah, sure, Al-Sisi, you should, you know, have democracy. Yeah. We're not going to sell you any more fighter jets. But that's about it. The Americans don't punish Egypt by cutting off economic aid and putting economic sanctions on Egypt the way the Americans are punishing economic sanctions today on Iran, because Iran threatens these authoritarian, conservative, feudal, corrupt, archaic Arab feudal regimes in the Persian Gulf. And they even have elections in Iran. So are Americans really as wonderful as they claim they are? Well, compared to the Hitler's Germany, I mean, how can you doubt that? But that's the theme in this article here, this editorial I wanted to highlight that we started off. This is in the New York Times. Joe Biden administration will restore American global leadership And it should. That's the prevailing view in Washington. That's the prevailing view by Joe Biden and Barack Obama and the supporters of Joe Biden, right? US leadership is a favorite trope of the foreign policy establishment. Remember, this establishment emerged during the Cold War, during containment. And it's claiming that this establishment saved the world from the Russian version of Nazi Germany, the Soviet Union. But this writer, and he's a professor, he claims that this worldview is outdated and obsolete, he's claiming, and dangerous. There's a lot we still don't know about how President-elect Joe Biden and his foreign policy team will approach the world, but this much is clear. They believe in American leadership. In a 2015 speech, Antony Blinken, Mr. Biden's choice to be Secretary of State, employed some version of the word 21 times of leadership, leadership, leadership. This spring, Mr. Biden wrote an essay in Foreign Affairs titled, "Why America Must Lead Again." Now, Foreign Affairs, everybody reading this newspaper knows that Foreign Affairs is where George Kennan in 1947, proposed his theory of containment, his strategy of containment under the X article, written by, and was published in Foreign Affairs, in which he said, basically Russia under the Soviet leadership is an expansionist threatening power and we have to contain it. And I think I can find that here just very briefly if I go to contain X article, yes, X article. Let me see if I can find this just to show you Foreign Affairs. So this is where the elite conduct their debates about American foreign policy. And here is the famous X article by George Kennan, formerly titled "The Sources of Soviet Conduct," also known as "The Long Telegram." It was an article written by George F. Kennan under the pseudonym Mr. X, published in, voila, Foreign Affairs, woo, in 1947. Kennan, who was the deputy chief of mission of the United States to the Soviet Union from 44 to 46, advocated in the article the policy of containment of the Soviet Union and strong anti-communism. And so here you see Joe Biden's nominee to be the Secretary of State for Joe Biden, Antony Blinken, is writing an article, Joe Biden wrote an article this spring. Mr. Biden wrote an essay in Foreign Affairs titled "Why America Must Lead Again," because it led and saved the world first from the Russian version of Nazi Germany. Last week, when he introduced his national security nominees, he said that America is back, ready to lead the world. And he says, who is this person? Professor Beinart. It says here, I didn't copy it. He's a professor of journalism. But he's a minority. Most people believe this. In a 2015 speech, I already said that, so in the post-Trump age, leadership is a misguided, even dangerous vision for America's relationship with the rest of the world. You Belgians, is American leadership so bad? For the past 4 years, foreign policy elites have trumpeted American leadership as the safe, bipartisan, and benign alternative to the Trump administration's belligerent America First nationalism. But look up the word lead in a dictionary, and you'll find definitions like the first or foremost place, being at the end of, the head of, and to control a group of people. Leadership doesn't mean motherhood and apple pie, it means being in charge. Mr. Biden has offered two justifications for why America deserves this privileged role. The first is hereditary. For 70 years, he wrote in Foreign Affairs, the United States under Democratic Republican presidents played a leading role in writing the rules that advance collective security and prosperity. In other words, America should lead the world now because it has done so effectively in the past. But between 1945 and 1989, according to Dov H. Levine's book, Meddling in the Ballot Box, the United States interfered in foreign elections 63 times. So Mr. Biden's cheery history of American Cold War leadership leaves a lot out. But even if you romanticize the post-World War II era, it's long gone. And that's true. Most Americans don't know about this and don't want to know about it because it's unpleasant. I mean, I told you I went to graduate school, and I had a professor named Richard Cottom. Richard Cottom was involved when he was in the CIA with Operation Ajax. So if I can show Operation Ajax, this was an American effort to overthrow, successful effort to overthrow the democratic leader of Iran in 1953, Operation Ajax. Yeah, where is this term Ajax? Well, this is the, yeah, Operation Ajax. And was the overthrow of the democratic elected Prime Minister Mohammad Mossadegh in favor of strengthening the monarchical rule of the Shah Mohammad Reza Pahlavi in 1953, orchestrated by the United States, Operation Ajax in the United Kingdom under the Operation Boot and carried out by the Iranian military. So the American justification was that this person, Mohammad Mossadegh, was a fool. He was Iran's man of the year. I mean, Time Magazine's man of the year at one point. Do Americans know about this person? Only if they pay close attention. They don't want to know about, and there would not have been an Islamic revolution in Iran were it not for Operation Ajax. This person was a secular Democrat. He was a secular nationalist leader of Iran, and the Americans overthrew him, and it was just, as a consequence, secular political leaders who advocated democracy, separation of church and state, and modernity. They looked like they were weak fools who were not able to oppose traditional British imperialism and now American imperialism that had dominated Iran until that time. And so as a result of his overthrow, secular nationalists looked weak and useless. And that set the stage for sectarian religious nationalists like Ayatollah Khomeini, right? This person led the Iranian Revolution against the Shah, who Americans put in power through Operation Ajax. This person became, and he's considered to be, I guess, the equivalent of Kim Il-sung in North Korea or George Washington in the United States. And he was not a Democrat. He was an authoritarian radical, religious authoritarian radical. He advocated killing the enemies of the regime. And he's called the Imam. I mean, so, and so my professor, who let me see, somebody put an entry for him in Wikipedia, which had not been there before. This was the professor I had, right? Was an American political scientist, Iranist, and Central Intelligence Agency operative in Iran. He played a role in that Operation Ajax. And this was just put in there in the last few months. There wasn't anything on Wikipedia for him until I checked a month ago. And he told me about Operation Ajax, about how the CIA paid for control over Tehran newspapers, just like this disinformation campaign going on in social media today. That's nothing new. It's just the technology is new. The KGB, the CIA were doing it all over the world during the Cold War, subsidizing and controlling newspapers to get their editorial line covered up with local faces, supporting a report, presenting what America wanted to happen, but hiding behind the face of some local figure or writer or journalist or editorial board. That's nothing new. But why don't Americans know this? Because they don't want to know it. It makes me feel bad about myself, and I want to have a positive self-image. I want to like myself. So we don't overthrow democratic regimes. No, we don't do that in America. America doesn't use the CIA to overthrow democracy. We don't do that. I don't know. This person told me he went to the CIA was very proud of itself when it overthrew Mossadegh in 1953. And the CIA published in the most popular magazine at the time a report about what they did in Iran to overthrow this person, Mossadegh. And it was published in the Saturday Evening Post. The Saturday Evening Post was the most popular magazine in the United States. In the United States, this is before television became really, really big, popular everyday occurrence in the United States. People used to read magazines and listen to the radio. And the CIA published a report about what they did in Iran. So this professor of mine, he went to a conference in of the American Political Science Association, right? The American Political Science Association is the main, one of the main organizations for political scientists in the United States. And he went to the conference of the American Political Science Association, I think in 1955 or 56. He quit the CIA and became a college professor at the University of Pittsburgh. So he went to the National American Political Science Association convention, and he interviewed all of the political scientists attending that national convention of the American Political Science Association. He said 9 out of 10 of these people attending this convention of this organization, 9 out of 10 did not know about Operation Ajax. They claim they did not know about Operation Ajax. 9 out of 10 among political scientists, right? The people whose job it is to know about these things, 9 out of 10 said they didn't know it. They didn't know about it. So how do you explain that? And I think you have to explain it from social psychology perspective. I don't want to know it. Because we as Americans, we don't do that. We're all about democracy and freedom and self-determination. I don't know. I'm not listening to you. I didn't know it. 9 out of 10. And so when this person makes the point that US interfered in foreign elections 63 times, I mean, and that's just one case. What are the other cases? I'll pull them up here. Stop share, and then we've got a screen share again and go here. The overthrowing Arbenz in Guatemala in 1954 was another great CIA operation, overseen by John Foster Dulles, was Secretary of State, and his brother Allen Dulles was head of the CIA. This triggered this overthrow of Arbenz in Guatemala, who wanted to do a land reform to distribute the land from plantations to the peasant farmers, led to a civil war that lasted until 1996. They killed hundreds of thousands of people. Another great CIA operation, the Bay of Pigs in Cuba, an invasion, was another operation that the CIA supported, giving the Bay of Pigs invasion here. The attempt to overthrow Castro with the CIA arming and training expatriates. Richard Nixon was Dwight Eisenhower's vice president, and he had oversight responsibility for this operation. And then Richard Nixon lost the election in 1960 to John F. Kennedy, and John F. Kennedy inherited this operation, but he didn't give it the support it needed to succeed. So he refused. John F. Kennedy, when he was president, refused to allow the US Air Force to provide air support, air cover support for the land invasion at the Bay of Pigs. And as a result, it failed miserably. And it was humiliating for US, and it strengthened Castro tremendously as a result of this operation. So, but typically Americans, including political scientists, they don't want to talk about this. But everybody in the Middle East knows about Operation Ajax. Everybody in Iran and the Middle East knows about it. Everybody in Latin America knows about the coup in Guatemala in 1954. Everybody. How many Americans do you think know about it in the United States? So Mr. Biden's cheery history of American Cold War leadership leaves a lot out. But even if you romanticize the post-World War II era, it is long gone. Remember, structuralists, neorealists, neoliberals talk about American benign hegemony. Benign hegemony. That American hegemony is not as vicious and brutal. It's nice compared to German or Soviet Russian or Japanese hegemony. Mr. Biden's second justification is moral. As he wrote in 2017, other nations follow our lead because they know that America does not simply protect its own interests, but tries to advance the aspirations of all. Oh, another one. This is the one I want to talk about also. Chile coup, 1973. This was another CIA operation, more recent and a little bit different, because here in this CIA operation against Salvador Allende that put Augusto Pinochet in power, this was an operation in which sectors of society were polarized. The middle class and the capitalists in Chile saw an intense threat from the working class and peasants in Chile, because Salvador Allende was elected in a democratic election, and the CIA played an important role in organizing his overthrow because he was a Marxist. He was a Marxist, had good relations with Castro, and so the United States decided he had to go because he was basically working with Castro, and Castro was working for Moscow. And he was replaced eventually with Augusto Pinochet, who stayed in power until 1990. And Chile has they implemented the neoliberal strategies of economic reform in the country under the so-called Chicago boys, right? These are the economists trained in the University of Chicago who advocated liberalization of markets, free markets. Neoliberalism was their theoretical focus, the Chicago boys out from the University of Chicago, and Milton Friedman and Arnold Harberger, and Augusto Pinochet implemented those policies and gave us the best performing economy in Latin America, but with great income differentiation. So now he left the scene in 1990, he died, and now they're beginning to rewrite the Chilean constitution. This is all in the midst of the pandemic. So again, I'm trying to point out that the legacy of the Cold War continues to the present. It's echoing further and further 30 years after the Cold War ended. So, the Chilean coup d'etat. And so you can read about that if you want, but the belief was that this person, again, the Russians are the Soviet Union is a Russian version of Nazi Germany. And in a world of nuclear weapons, they're not invading countries, although they can if they think they can get away with it, the way they invaded supposedly Afghanistan in 1979 under that weak-willed leader, Jimmy Carter, supposedly, allegedly. But typically they'll work through their spies and agents and conspiratorial operations using their covert capabilities to spread communism, because they can't act like the Nazis in Germany under Hitler because we have nuclear weapons in the world. So we have to do it. They have to expand their influence in a more vicious way, and that would typically be the American justification that, well, we didn't have any choice. I mean, the Soviet Union is trying to spread communism, and you got to fight fire with fire. And sometimes you have to support a bad guy because a bad guy is better than a horrible guy. Park Chung-hee in South Korea, he's a bad guy. Compared to Kim Il-sung, who would you prefer, Park Chung-hee or Kim Il-sung? And the American claim is you have to choose, because the Soviet Union is using Kim Il-sung and Fidel Castro and Salvador Allende to spread their world empire. You have to choose. And we'll choose Park Chung-hee because he's a lot better than Kim Il-sung. And so, yeah, you have to do these things because the communists are cruel and evil, and they'll do anything. Remember that diabolical enemy stereotype that we talked about in class that came from Henry Kissinger's Nuclear Weapons and Foreign Policy. The communists care nothing about human rights. They spend blood like it's water. That's who we're fighting. Stalin and his bloodthirsty henchmen. So, we got to be tough guys. We have to support Park Chung-hee. We got to get rid of fools like Mohammad Mossadegh and Salvador Allende, because they're going to deliver their countries to the Soviet Empire. And once you're in the Soviet Empire, you never get out, was the claim. Once you're in the Soviet Empire, you never leave. Park Chung-hee, he'll fall and be replaced by somebody else. They'll have democratic elections eventually in Korea. Ferdinand Marcos in Philippines, you know, he's a dictator. He's an authoritarian military dictator. He'll leave office at some point, and then you'll have elections. But once you join the Marxist-Leninist totalitarian empire, you never leave. It's like going to hell. Once you're in hell, you're in hell. You're staying there. So yeah, we had to do bad things, but it's not our fault. It's Moscow's fault. So Mr. Biden's cheery history of American Cold War leadership leaves, okay, we already covered that. Mr. Biden's second justification is moral. As he wrote in 2017, other nations follow our lead because they know that America does not simply protect its own interests, but tries to advance the aspirations of all. But it's hard to survey America's behavior in recent decades and glean some special commitment to global welfare. According to a study by Brown University's Watson Institute for International and Public Affairs, America's post 9/11 wars have displaced 37 million people. They destroyed Iraq. They invaded Iraq, triggered a civil war that killed, I don't know how many thousands. People argue about how many people have died in Iraq since 2003 when the Americans invaded. Not to mention how many died under the sanctions that were put on Iraq after it invaded Kuwait in 1990. I don't know, I don't want to hear it. No. And even before Donald Trump entered the White House, the United States had refused to ratify international treaties that ban landmines, cluster bombs, and nuclear tests, regulate the global sale of arms, protect the oceans, enable prosecution of genocide and war crimes, and safeguard the rights of women, children, and people with disabilities. This is before Trump came into office in 2016. The U.S. refused to ratify international treaties that ban landmines, cluster bombs, and nuclear tests, treaties that regulate the global sale of arms, treaties that protect the oceans, treaties that enable prosecution of genocide and war crimes, and treaties that safeguard the rights of women, children, and people with disabilities. Typically, those treaties are negotiated under the United Nations framework. Like we already talked about, the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, right? So that is the United Nations framework for the 2015 Paris Accord. US, even when the president, like Bill Clinton or Barack Obama signed them, the Republican who would follow them into office would then take the American president's name off the treaty. So when Joe Biden comes into office next month, he'll put his name back on the 2015 Paris Accord, but the US Senate's not going to approve it unless something really unusual happens. They're not going to ratify it. They're not going to ratify the treaty. Most countries on earth have ratified all or nearly all of these agreements. No other nation has spurned every single one. Only Americans have spurned them, but other nations follow America's lead because we try to advance the aspirations of all, says Joe Biden. I mean, somebody who supports Trump says, yeah, that's why I support Trump, because he tells it like it is. He's honest. Biden lies. Obama lies. Trump at least is honest. I'm for America first. I'm not going to bullshit you about, oh, we're here because we want to provide everything for everybody, blah, 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 blah. Trump is honest, they claim. So you can read on about that. So please respond to the following statement. American global leadership is necessary for effective global coordinated action to prevent anthropogenic climate change catastrophe. And that's sort of a lead up to our debate on Friday. And so we'll go to the debate. And here we go. So please vote. Vote. Two more people to vote. 20 seconds. Ten seconds. And there you see the results. Agree, disagree, classes divided, don't really know. Yeah, I mean, necessary might not be sufficient, but is it necessary? Of course, a structural realist might point out, well, who's going to provide this leadership if not the United States? Xi Jinping of China, under the Marxist-Leninist one-party dictatorship of the People's Republic of China, is going to provide leadership for you, South Koreans, you, Belgians, or, okay, maybe not China, China, authoritarian Marxist-Leninist China in partnership with the European Union? Are they going to provide this leadership? The European Union together in partnership with the authoritarian one-party dictatorship regime of China that attempts to assimilate by force Tibetans and Uyghurs? If not the United States, who? No one? Or is the European Union going to do it on its own? They're going to provide leadership, this 27 member state entity. Who's going to do it? They can't even keep Britain in the European Union. They're going to provide global leadership to make the world carbon neutral by 2050 in 30 years. Well, maybe. I don't know. I mean, it's something to think about. Well, if that's the case, then please explain your group's placement on this ordinal. This is an ordinal scale, means you can measure 1, 2, 1.5, 2.5 degrees of intensity. So that's a statistical term, because if you go further in social sciences, you're going to have to study statistics at some point. So an ordinal scale. So please explain your group's answer. And so let's divide you into breakout rooms, into groups of 4. And let's say the second person on the list is the chair of the group. The second person on the list is the chair of the group. Ready, set, go. And so the second group is you, and whoever you is in room 1. Second person in room 2 is Hyun Chong Song. Second person in room 3 is Laura Steyert. And the second person in room 4 is Sang Hoon. So open all rooms. And come up with your group's statement of where you are on this continuum. Where's ooh? Who's ooh? Well, Jumel, we can't find somebody for group 1. We can't find the mysterious ooh. They haven't joined. So Antoine, you're going to be the leader for group 1.
Like, so as it as it is written in the book, it says